My name is Ernest Morel. I'm a faculty member here at TC. On behalf of the Latino Faculty Working Group and the Institute for Urban and Minority Education, I'd like to welcome you and just thank you for coming out for the DREAM Act panel. Hopefully it'll be enlightening and we'll have some information from folks that are very closely involved in this project, but also some time for audience dialogue. If we go from my right to left, we have Senator Bill Perkins, State Assemblyman Guillermo Linares, Jiang Men, Jihad Aceveda, Kevin Doherty, Kenny Nienhauser, and Regina Cortina. And I'd also like to recognize Catalina Sancho Crespo, who's going to be introducing Senator Perkins and Assemblymember Linares, and also closing out. And we also have another special guest here, Carlos Sada, who's from the General Consulate from Mexico in New York City. So thank you for being here with us, sir.
Tonight we have the pleasure of having Senator Bill Perkins and Assemblyman Guillermo Linares, who introduced last March 22nd of 2011 the New York State DREAM Act. Senator Bill Perkins was elected to the New York State Senate in November of 2006. He represents the 30th State Senate District, which includes Harlem, the Upper West Side, and Washington Heights. A lifelong resident of Harlem, he served on the New York City Council for 8 years. Senator Perkins is a strong advocate of public education. In addition to introducing the New York State DREAM Act to the New York State Senate, he has supported the City University of New York in its mission of access and excellence, and supports initiatives for early cancer detection and asthma mitigation. And he holds a BA from Brown University. Assemblyman Guillermo Linares was elected to the New York State Assembly to represent New York Assembly District 72, which includes Washington Heights, Inwood, and Marble Hill in northern Manhattan. He serves as Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs from 2004 to 2009, and served in the New York City Council from 1992 to 2001. He was the first Dominican-born elected to public office in the United States in 1991. In the 1980s, he was a public school teacher in Washington Heights and served on the local school board for 3 terms. He holds a BA and a MS degrees from City College and an EDD from Teachers College from the Department of International and Transcultural Studies. Please give a warm welcome to our representatives.
This is a very, very personal piece of legislation for me. It's very, very personal. I see this as a piece of legislation that, in many respects, defines my own personal experience. But before I go any further, I just want to get something clear. For those of you who have come here since Columbus, please stand up. Everybody who's been here, came along with Columbus, please stand up. You know, you're from that period. Okay. Or your heritage is from that period. Okay. So from that point of view, none of us are original to this place. Am I correct? Unless you came with Columbus and those guys, and they weren't original either, by the way. So I just want to be, or were you here when he got here? Okay, neither was I, and or my people. In fact, we might have come on that boat subsequently, but some of you might have also. But the point I want to make here is that we all, from that perspective, are immigrants, maybe not even documented, depending upon who's doing the documentation. And we got to be very clear about that perspective, because once we start getting into undocumented and documented prejudices and barriers are set up that don't make real sense from a historical perspective. These are all a matter of time and a matter of perspective, and very often a matter of prejudice. So as a product of the civil rights movement, I'm very sensitive about this particular piece of legislation because I see it as a piece of civil rights legislation. And nothing could have underscored that more than what took place yesterday when the Dreamers decided to walk from Washington Heights to Albany. A 6-day walk, reminding us very much of the civil rights movement and the walks of Dr. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders who wanted to dramatize the significance of the cause that they were prepared not just to walk for, but in some cases to die for. And so these Dreamers, from my point of view, are the children of that movement as well. They are carrying on that movement in the greatest of traditions, in the face of the greatest, most powerful opposition. I'm sorry to say, amongst those in that opposition at this point that has to be addressed is our Governor Cuomo, okay? Who, by the way, also comes from an immigrant background, which they are very proud of and they should be very proud of. Because in order for this piece of legislation to move forward, it is a piece of legislation in which leadership of the highest order will have to come into play. This is not just going to be a grassroots movement that knocks down the doors and the walls of the rich and the powerful in order to get things done and get the attention of the media. This is a piece of legislation that will be determined in the political process, in the legislative process. And to his credit, this governor has shown in a very short period of time that when he wants it, he knows how to maneuver the political process to get it. We have passed a historic budget, not only on time, but ahead of time, and also with some cuts that make it a much more balanced budget than it has been in a long time. So I come to this today with a political agenda that speaks not just to this bill, which we will get into the details of throughout the evening, but also to make sure that we understand that the process that we're here about is a political process, a legislative process, and I take the position that the leadership has to come from the governor of the state of New York, because this is a piece of legislation that will fulfill dreams of young people by virtue of what the state has to offer and should be willing to offer to these young people. So we can get into the details of the bill if you'd like. I can tell you what the DREAM Act is and why it's important and so on and so forth. And we will obviously get into that. But I just wanted to make sure that I preface my remarks with what I think is the most important part of this conversation, which is how do we get this passed? And where does the political opportunities lay in order for us to move this agenda further? As a matter of fact, what I'd like to do in conclusion is just read to you a letter, an open letter that I sent to our governor that basically to some extent lays out why this is so important to us. Dear Governor, with great concern and disappointment, I'm writing you today, April 4th, 2012, because on March 27, 2012, during a press conference regarding budgetary agreements, you were asked about your support of the New York State DREAM Act. My disappointment was sparked by the implication that it is not worth your support because it cannot offer citizenship. Though you later stated that you support the concept of, quote, creative ways to incentivize education for new immigrants, I would like to take this opportunity to clarify any misconceptions you may have about the New York State DREAM Act as proposed by my bill, Senate Bill 4179C. I am concerned that on one hand, you state that you fully support it and you support creative ways to incentivize education for new immigrants. Yet, you are not supporting it. Let me take this opportunity to clarify. As we know, the New York State DREAM Act cannot offer citizenship. That power rests with the federal government. However, it certainly aids in the process by promoting educational attainment and economic independence. As you are aware, demonstrating continued employment and economic independence are key factors in becoming a citizen. Moreover, it is not our job to define what can be and what cannot be called a DREAM Act. That responsibility rests with the dreamers. What we name this legislation is not the issue. Rather, it is the goals the legislation aims to achieve, which, if passed, would mean a great deal to a lot of our young dreamers. You also stated that you wish you had, as governor, the power to make citizenship decisions. Though clearly this is not a direct citizenship decision, as governor, you do have the power to push for policies and programs that you support. In fact, this has been your modus operandi since first taking office. As with all policies and programs that you wish to see accomplished and implemented, you find a way to get it done. From redesigning the tax structure of the state to implementing Tier 6, you have continued to aggressively advocate and push for the issues that are important to you and New Yorkers. As you and many others know, if you truly wanted to see the New York State DREAM Act become law, you could have put it in your executive budget, which is a tactic you and scores of governors before you have used. Your full and aggressive support of the DREAM Act is needed at this time. Anything less may be perceived as you merely feigning support in the interest of political coverage while avoiding the political controversy, and that you do not truly support it. The fact is, however, that while the political dance ensues, tens of thousands of undocumented youth continue to suffer and await uncertain futures. As a state that has benefited from having one of the largest and most diverse immigrant populations and who has been on the forefront of progressive immigration policies, we must push back on the tide of national and local anti-immigrant sentiments and policies. We have one of the nation's premier public higher education systems, and we should be providing all New Yorkers with the same access, assistance, and opportunity to get a quality education. We are a nation that welcomes, not a nation that rejects or denies the freedoms and opportunities which the Statue of Liberty represents and for which New York is highly regarded. According to the United States Census Bureau, New York State is comprised of nearly 22% foreign-born residents that add to the beautiful mosaic of New York. Many of these residents live in New York City area, but many foreign-born residents also call Long Island their home. Nassau County consists of over 20% foreign-born residents, and Suffolk has almost 15%. The populations of Nassau and Suffolk County amount to 1,339,532 and 1,493,350 respectively. Thus, the number of foreign-born residents in each county total 277,283 and 209,069. The voices in these communities deserve true representation and support from their elected officials. They deserve, like all other New Yorkers, the same access to educational opportunity. Passing my bill would send a clear message to these communities and the country that New York fully supports and represents its residents. Adopting anything less would be inadequate. Yet, this bill is about access to education, but it is also about providing a pathway to economic prosperity for both the individual receiving the education and for the state. Increasing education level of workers also increases their productivity, and the more highly educated the state's labor force, the more attractive the state is as a place to locate businesses. If you want New York to be open for business, then it's time to open the doors of opportunity. There are currently an estimated 475,000 undocumented immigrants in New York State labor force. Having large numbers of undocumented workers should not be considered a permanent situation. Federal reform is urgently needed to fix immigration policy, but gridlock at the federal level should not prevent New York State from investing in its own economy. The National Skills Coalition reports that New York is facing a shortage of workers who have the required skill level for most job openings. New York would benefit greatly from undocumented students receiving access to a college education. In fact, the National Skills Coalition also estimates that 39% of all future job openings will require at least an associate's degree. Furthermore, at its foundation, the New York State DREAM Act comes down to a basic principle on which the nation was founded. It is universally accepted that those who pay taxes should benefit from those taxes, whether those benefits be public safety or access to higher education. According to the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy, undocumented immigrants paid over $662 million in taxes to New York State in 2010, making it the fourth state with the highest revenue in taxes from undocumented immigrants. They paid approximately $104.4 million in personal income taxes, $95 million in property taxes, and over $460 million in sales taxes. It is unjust, unfair, and un-American to collect well over $500 million in tax revenue from undocumented immigrants only to deny them financial support that is granted to other New Yorkers. Plainly speaking, this legislation would respect the dignity and contributions of undocumented youth in New York. In fact, the benefits realized by this bill will undeniably outweigh the cost. As you know, the Fiscal Policy Institute estimates that the cost will be less than 2% of TAP. Moreover, the Board of Regents estimates that the cost will be less than 1% of TAP. Again, this bill is more than just about access to education. It is also about providing a pathway to economic prosperity for individuals and strengthening the economy of New York State. This bill will help create jobs and foster economic growth. Restricting access to education is not the way to grow our economy and is not the way to promote economic growth. By ignoring these worthy individuals who yearn for access to higher education, we are failing to truly address their needs as a community, and we are ignoring the potential to create jobs, thousands of jobs in this state, and help grow our economy. So, in a brief way, I've tried to share with the governor, as I've shared with you, why this act is so important and why it speaks so much, not just to the needs of those who would benefit from it directly, but just as importantly to the needs of everybody in this room, everybody in this state. And therefore, it is compelling for us to make sure that this opportunity that we have today not only end with enlightenment, but also, I would hope, with each and every one of us making a commitment to make sure that our governor understands how important this legislation is. Thank you very much.
It's really great for me to be back and literally to be here with the Institute for Urban and Minority Education. I highlight that because in the 80s, when I was helping organize parents, immigrant parents in Washington Heights to advocate on behalf of their children, I was looking for a way to take courses at Columbia Teachers College without being able to pay. So the way was to work for the Institute, doing training to bilingual educators in the city and beyond. And that's how I paid my courses. I was able to get by. And then I got elected to the city council and put all my doctorate work aside as a first, to show that I may be an immigrant whose parents came to New York undocumented and overstayed or stay here and lived for 2 years on the shadows and left 7 children. I'm the oldest of 9 now, in a farm in the Dominican Republic. When I came at an early age, teenager, to the Bronx, not knowing English, not ever been in a large city, and became a teacher, I wanted to make sure that our immigrant students in coming and arriving here did not go through the hell that I went through when I went to high school, literally. I didn't think I was going to make it. And I did make it with a general diploma, not an academic one, because I was still learning the language. And because my mother was driven and she never went to school, but she knew exactly why she convinced my father to let her come, and then 3 months later, she sent for him. And they then petitioned us after getting green cards. She knew that the one thing that she wanted for me and my brothers and sisters was an opportunity for us to attend school and hopefully maybe go to college. And like so millions of immigrants that have come here to see their children be the first to enter an institution of higher education. I was the first in my family, but this is the case. And the reason we're here and the reason we have the New York Dream Act is because if there is one thing that rings high and loud and really penetrates deep in terms of the fabric of this country, is the opportunity for newcomers, historically, to be able to give it all, sacrifice it all, and hope that their children will have an opportunity to access education. Because with that, hopefully the legacy of that sacrifice realizes into something that sacrifice can translate to. And I think within that is where you find the fabric of what has made this country what it is today. and it rings high and loud and deep today. And so when I was asked for the mayor when I was about to defend my dissertation here, and you know how some of you knows, when you have to prepare and defend, the mayor called me and he says, Guillermo, I have a job for you. And I said, Mr. Mayor, I'm preparing to defend my dissertation. And I tried to do that before, and then I got elected to the city council, the first Dominican in the country, and I put it aside. If you now appoint me to be commissioner of immigrant affairs for the city of New York, I'm representing now 3 million immigrant New Yorkers, 500,000 of which are undocumented. There goes the doctorate. All my friends and community will say, he says, Guillermo, I'll give you a week to think about this, but I promise you something. If in a week you come back and say yes to me, I promise you that you will have flexibility to finish your doctorate. I said yes to him. He didn't give me flexibility, but I finished my doctorate. But I spent 5 years serving immigrant New Yorkers. When Bill Perkins, who called me, fresh after landing at the state legislature, because I decided to resign 5 years later after being commissioner to go back to serving my constituents and communities from an elected position, and I went and landed. I got a call from my colleague in the city council, Senator Perkins, and he says, Guillermo, I have a piece of legislation that was crafted by a group of dreamers. 2 of them are here, and they represent all of the undocumented dreamers that are, putting their life at stake, walking to Albany, but also every day on a daily basis. And he said, Guillermo, I have a piece of legislation. I can't think of no one but you to work with me to introduce this piece of legislation in the assembly side. And I said, well, let's meet. We met, and the rest, I have to say, I think this forum here speaks highly of, but I would say that perhaps this piece of legislation is historic in many ways because it relates to the failure of the federal government to act and address the need to do immigration reform in this country. And we just have to go back and see what has happened in previous efforts and how detrimental that has been. But it's a failure also to pass the DREAM Act at the federal level. And we have a mandate as a state and as municipalities, and that is to safeguard the interest of those who live within our borders. The safety and security is the mandate, sacred constitutional mandate that we have as a government. And that includes those who may be undocumented or out of status. Let's put it that way. And so at this point, this piece of legislation is under consideration after we have seen 5 states pass it, 4 states. California, New Mexico, Texas, Illinois, and we're next. We're 5th in New York. Now, let me tell you that if there is something that we should all understand, no matter what party we belong to, or whether we are independent, no matter how many generations we may have been around here, or how recently we have arrived, is how fundamental and critical for the future of the state and country is for us to have an educated workforce. There is no argument on that. And many of the dreamers have come at an early age We have already invested with them. They have attended elementary or intermediate or high school. They have, in spite of all the challenges that an immigrant faces and the family of that immigrant young person has, managed to confront and overcome all of those obstacles to get a diploma. And it's with our investment. So when we have gone 90% of the way, we're going to turn our back on them when the difference between a high school diploma and getting a 4-year degree is $25,000 more when you enter the workforce, $4,000 in taxes for the state. But that's only the material dimension. It is the yearning, it is the talent, it is the drive, it is the inspiration that they represent, that has been represented by waves of immigrants that have arrived here, wave after wave, and continues to be so. The day that we take away the opportunity for dreamers to realize their potential so that they have an opportunity to serve everybody, then we are sentencing ourselves and our future. That's how I see it. So to conclude, I would say we have the entire educational community supporting this piece of legislation. I mean, from the regions to the two public educational systems, CUNY and SUNY, and across the board, there is support. We have labor, the labor movement supporting. We have the New York Immigration Coalition, the Hispanic Federation, the Youth Leadership Council that is now walking to Albany. We have Make the Road. We have the Partnership for New York City. That's the private sector. That's corporate. You know, the corporations we have in everyone from different angles. Now, at this point, I say that what we need with this piece of legislation is to have New Yorkers communicate with the leadership in Albany. And who would that be? Lo and behold, the governor of the state of New York needs to weigh in. And I'm going to tell you, I am really, really hopeful that the governor will do the right thing now, because what it takes is for him to have a sense that there is expectation across the state, upstate, downstate, west, and east, that this is the correct thing to do now. And the reason his leadership is important is because in Albany, to get things done, the governor now ranks high when it comes to the assembly, where I have 60 sponsors, 58 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and counting, sponsoring my legislation. But we also need to communicate with the speaker in the assembly. We need to speak with the president of the Senate, Vince Kellos, and they are the leadership that needs to tailor what is a very insignificant in the scheme of the $132.5 billion budget that we have, when we talk about less than 2% of the total amount of tuition assistance for these students to be able to enter and be able to graduate. And this is as simple as that. This is the moment to pass this historic legislation, and it's simple and clear. It sends a strong message to the rest of the country, to the leadership, from the president to the Congress, but it also sends a message to us all New Yorkers that we're not going to let dreamers and the young people that promise so much behind. And I say, at this point, this is the moment to make it happen in this legislative session. And I'm confident that the governor, as he did when I approached him about the executive order on language access that I helped craft for the city of New York, it's now a policy for the entire state. I think that he will, and I've been in communication with all three leaders, and I'm confident that we're going to make it happen. So any call, any communication, whichever mean you have, will be highly appreciated, and then we will celebrate a great victory for the students.
Tonight we are honored to have two dreamers with us. They will share their experience of being an undocumented youth in the United States. We first have Jongmin, was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1980. When he was just a year old, his parents immigrated to the United States on student visas. Though their visa expired in 1985, they had lived in Nashville until Jongmin was 8. When they moved to Brooklyn, where they currently live and work. He had attended Mark Twain Junior High School and had gone back to Tennessee for college at Knoxville, where he graduated magna cum laude in 2003 with a BA degree in sociology and a concentration in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. After graduation, he came back to New York City and worked in the underground economy at a nearby flower store, a pizzeria, and a grocery store. Now, after 9 years of post-college life, he still campaigns actively via online or underground for the DREAM Act and comprehensive immigration reform to pass. He also advocates passionately for suicide prevention of undocumented youth, as this issue has become more prevalent over time. To him, his foremost goal is and will always be the saving of many lives. Our second dreamer is Jihad Aceveda. She was born in Oaxaca, Mexico. At the age of 4, her parents brought to the United States, and they came to the United States in search of a better life. She was the first one in her family to graduate from high school and is now working in a second bachelor's degree. Jihad is also the founder and policy director of Dream Scholars, a grassroots group founded by undocumented students. Please welcome our dreamers.
My name is Jihad Aceveda, and I am an undocumented student. To become an undocumented person requires very little, but it's the result of tremendous social, political, environmental, and economical pressure. At the age of 3, my parents came to the United States in search of a better life and left my brother and myself with my grandparents in Mexico. Their plan was to come to the States and just work for a year and then go back. Before my mom came to the United States, she made me promise her that I was going to take good care of my little brother. I stayed with my grandfather, and he had 9 little children, and then there was me and my brother. My grandfather was the sole provider of the household, and he worked in the agricultural business. He was paid with food ratios. There were times where we wouldn't eat for days because my grandfather will be only given like a bucket of oranges to bring home. And that was all we had for the whole family. There were days where I didn't eat so my little brother could eat. He wasn't my priority. My father came back to Mexico and brought me a doll. I took the doll and I told him I didn't want it. I wanted to be with my mother. I cried to my father, and He then arranged for my brother and myself to come to the States. He made me promise here that I will work really hard and succeed in everything I tried. I was the first one in my family to graduate from elementary school, and now in high school, and now I'm working towards my second degree in college. In order for me to achieve this level of education, I had to work various jobs. In high school, I joined the girls' swimming team and became co-captain. And from there, I was able to achieve a license in lifeguarding. During the summer, I worked various jobs as a lifeguard. There's a shortage in the city of lifeguards, so it wasn't really hard, to be honest, to find a job. I'm a skilled laborer, and that's one wonderful thing that undocumented immigrants like me bring. We fit the job that are necessary. I worked really hard, and on my last year as a marketing major, like every student, I asked myself, what now? What should I do with my degree? So I booked a flight to San Diego, a border town, just to find myself, to see whether I should stay here in the States or should I go back to Mexico. After all, I no longer, not only do I have no English, do I have a license as a lifeguard, but I am also about to have a degree. I could be well off back home. Well, I was in San Diego. I was just shocked at the way how there were many stores that sold Mexican clothing, Mexican pottery. There were restaurants that served Mexican food. And I just couldn't understand how people loved my culture, loved my language, but just couldn't accept me. At the same time, SB 1070, what's happening? That drove me to come back home to New York and use my degree in marketing to fight for human rights, for our civil rights. I am now, that led me to establish Dream Scholars and not only advocate for the New York State Dream Act, the Dream Fund, but also the National Dream Act. Why do I advocate for the Dream Act? And it's not about me. It's about the future generations. I don't want them to go through the same struggle as I did. I want everybody to have the same opportunities as I did and as you do. The New York State Dream Act will allow undocumented students the opportunity to apply for TAP. We're not asking for handouts. I pay my taxes with all my hard work. I'm just asking for the same opportunity as every student here. And that is why I'm supportive of the New York State Dream Act, because it will give me the same rights that I've been working for as everybody else.
It's just an honor to be here today with such amazing panelists and to hear all the great hard work and the activism in our lives. And I guess I'd like to thank just the panelists themselves for doing all the, for what they've done so far. You know, we could never come to this point in time without any of it, without any of us coming and working so hard on our goals and our dreams. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here today about my life, and plus the audience members for perhaps we can all work together for a more just, compassionate, and humane immigration and educational system. So my name is Jong Min, and I was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1980. Yes, I'm currently 30-ish, 2 years old, and I know I don't look it, but I am. My parents, like everybody else, immigrated to the United States, but we came in 1981, and for the first 7 years, we lived in the great city of Nashville, Tennessee. I was a good student, probably even a great student, but then we're all great students in grade school, I believe. And in 1988, we moved to New York, where they did own a grocery store. And then I had attended Mark Twain at Stuyvesant High School. And it was at Stuyvesant, when I was a junior at the age of 17, my whole world had turned upside down. I had wanted to be a pediatrician back then, and there was this hospital residency program that the school was offering. So I went to the hospital, and the hospital had told me to get my green card. And I was like, okay, I'll just go home and get it. So I went back to my parents' store, and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, where's my green card? And she says, it's at the house. And I said, okay, fine, I'll just go home and try to find this mythical, magical green card, gold-plated, diamond-encrusted with my name on it. And so I went home, and of course I could never find this green card. And I called her back, and I said, where is it? And she said, Joe, when you don't have one, you can't do that program, and you can't tell anybody about this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she says, yeah, we've been working on it for years, and this was back in 97, so 15 years. And I was just so shocked because I had lived here for 16, 17 years up to that point, and I wasn't a citizen or anything, even though I thought I was. And it was all a lie. Nevertheless, I did struggle to graduate Stuyvesant after that, but did go to college back at Tennessee, where I did graduate magna cum laude with a degree in sociology, with a concentration in criminal justice, and a minor in psychology, all the way back in 2003. My story is really more what happens after all that education and why the DREAM Act is important to us, even in our 30s. Because for the last 9 years, I've worked at my parents' grocery store, flower shop, construction sites, and even a flower store. It's been very bleak and humbling to say the least, even with my college degree and having to work all these under-the-table jobs. Because there's really no chance for me to ever do great things and become part of the American fabric while living here without a pathway to citizenship. However, without whatever the present situation may be, I still have hope. I still dream. And it's these beliefs that have always inspired me to keep on fighting so that we all have a brighter future and better tomorrow. For my goal is to be a great federal judge. Maybe I could come to Columbia one day. I was just looking at, maybe I could come to Columbia Law School one day and do great things there. Because maybe many years down the road, like Ruth Ginsburg, I could be on the Supreme Court bench. And so, I also believe that just in the motto, if you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you can land among the stars. I really just want what everybody else wants, a chance at the American dream. And the belief that if you work hard enough, you can succeed and become anything you want to be, especially here in the land of opportunity. And I guess I'm gonna switch gears here for a second. I think recently, or tragically, within the last couple of years, the DREAM Act is very important. The New York State DREAM Act, the Federal DREAM Act, and it's always been on my mind and everybody else's mind that we talk about, even immigration reform with my parents. But I think the last couple of years, especially from what I've read and throughout my activism, even online activism, I just kept reading certain things and certain topics would always kind of come out, catch my eye. And I would think about it, and then I guess I would kind of forget about it. But then I realized at one point in time, I always thought about this particular issue late at night, 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning when I was sleeping at my computer. And my mom had to wake me up and say, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm just reading. Not playing video games, mind you, but reading. As some of us may know now, undocumented do not generally have access to higher education. These scholarships are generally private. There's no financial aid so far. But they also have many other barriers. They can't drive, they can't vote, and they can't work legally here in the United States. They too fall behind their peers in all the so-called cool categories, such as owning a nice car, having good clothes, and even fancy stuff like iPhones and iPads. I think what you will see is that most of them, we've become depressed, even severe depression, and having suicidal thoughts and behavior. And sadly, within the last 2 years, there's been rash suicides by undocumented youth. I just hope that by advocating and passing the DREAM legislation bills and giving inspiration to those who need it the most, we can help make them make the right choices in life. For that really is my ultimate goal. Because if we could give them hope, guidance, and an education, I know we could save many lives as well. Please support the DREAM Act. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from three of my colleagues at Teachers College who will talk about various aspects of the DREAM Act. The first is my colleague, Dr. Regina Cortina. Dr. Cortina is an associate professor here at Teachers College. Since the late 90s, a key focus of her work has been the impact of human migration on schools in the United States. As a background for this emphasis, Dr. Cortina notes that mass migration of Mexicans to the eastern seaboard started in the 90s. The same phenomenon is bringing them to Florida and to New York State. Dr. Cortina has conducted research and made presentations on the migratory circuits that are bringing a larger and larger number of Latin American-born students to schools in the United States. Her efforts aim to create a greater understanding of the needs of these students. Toward that end, she works actively with teachers and educational leaders to shape policies and practices that will expand educational opportunities for Latino students. Since the publication of her book on Mexican children in the public schools of New York, she has expanded her research along those lines to look more broadly at Latinos generally in New York City. Dr. Cortina.
I remember the first time when I came to New York, I was at NYU, and I was invited to give a talk about immigration to a school in Queens. And I arrived to give my talk, and the principal, they called in the loudspeakers that the talk was going to start. And so there were all these teachers that came into the auditorium, and the principal said that I was going to talk about immigration. And so I started talking about, and the teachers asked me then why they don't return where they came from. So we have seen that there has been a big change in the way all our immigrant students are welcome but there is still a lot that needs to be done. So I want to thank John and Jahira for being here and sharing their stories with us. And so I just want to show you a few numbers to see how important this is, not only for New York State, but for the whole United States. When, President Obama said that he asked this question and he promised that he was going to, he says, can the United States regain its rank as a country with the highest percentage of college graduates in the world? The United States used to have this ranking as a country with the most college graduates in the world. And I'm going to show you what has happened to the United States when compared to other countries. This is the statistic is a little old. But today, the United States has 18 countries that are above in terms of the young people being able to graduate from college. And so if you see Canada, there are 25 to 34, is 54.8, while the United States is over here where is 39.2. But what is more important about this, of all these other countries, you can see that the younger generation is graduating at the highest rate of college than their parents and their grandparents. And the very sad thing about the United States is that it's the only country that is going down. The younger generation has less access to college than their parents and their grandparents. So this is why it is so important what Senator Perkins and Assemblyman Linares are doing, because there is no reason that in the wealthiest economy in the world, the young people are not having such access to higher education, and how the United States now is at the level of Spain versus, and since then these numbers, these disparities are growing. You know, these statistics are from 2006, published in 2008. Today I'm sure that Canada is at 60% and the United States is going down. Anyway, so I wanted to share this because it's such an important part of what you're doing, is to really increase the opportunities of young people against the peers of other countries, Korea, Japan, New Zealand. And I also want to show you these statistics about New York City, where I have been doing a lot of research among the Latino population. And unfortunately, Assembly Linares, still a lot of our Latino students are graduating with the local diplomas. The local diplomas that are not allowing them to really be competitive to enter college. So if you see here, there are male and females, and you see how almost all of them, 80%, US-born Latinos, Dominican Republic-born, and Mexican-born students are graduating with the local diplomas. And you can see how the percentage of students that are graduating is very low. 34% of US-born Latinos that enter high school graduate. There is a huge difference between young males and females, and you can see here the difference. So there is a lot to do, not only in terms of the DREAM Act, but in terms of the opportunities they have within the K-12 educational system. Because if we give them the opportunity to go to college through the DREAM Act, they have to be prepared to be able to enter college and succeed. And these statistics show that New York City has a long way to go to really prepare these students to enter college and finish successfully. And I just wanted to finish my remark to say, you know, how the foreign-born population in the United States had grown in the last 2 decades. The last 2 decades when there was the need, this immigration really grow. And in New York, there is a lot of Spanish-speaking, both from Latin America and the Caribbean and the Asian region. And the last thing I want to say is that there are so many children that are born here in the United States with parents that are foreign-born, that we're not going to be able to get documents. And I think these children are the promise. The promise to get educated is this bill that you're trying to pass. So I think there is a big reason for all of us in New York to support what you're doing. And I hope everybody after this session today writes Governor Cuomo and ask him to please act in favor of New Yorkers. Thank you, and thank you very much for being here.
We'll now hear from Professor Kevin Doherty. Dr. Kevin Doherty is an Associate Professor of Higher Education. His current research is focused on the origins and consequences of state accountability systems for higher education. Dr. Doherty has also done extensive research and writing on state policies affecting access to and success in community colleges by minority and low-income students, and policies affecting immigrant student access to higher education. Dr.
Thank you. I was involved with a research project with Dr. Kenny Neinhauser and Blanca Vega, who's a doctoral student in the higher ed program, looking at the political origins of in-state tuition policy in Texas, why it passed there but was resoundingly stopped in Arizona. And that's a study that came out a couple of years ago. Let me talk a little bit about the background that we know about in-state tuition policy, a little bit about its current state, why it's important, and what steps we might be thinking about. First, let's think about where it stands. New York State is one of 12 states across the country that has a state law that has provides for in-state tuition eligibility for undocumented immigrants. The states that are in those 12 include Connecticut, but not New Jersey, which is where I happen to live. And that's worth pondering, not New Jersey. The states that are included are somewhat surprising because you think immediately, well, certainly the more liberal states would have these policies. Well, yes, Illinois, California, but Texas, Utah, Nebraska, but not New Jersey, not Massachusetts. And that's something really that we have to ponder. Of those states, only them provide for financial aid. And I want to come back and talk about why that's important. So let's think about the significance of this. Why is this policy important? What we know is without eligibility for in-state tuition, undocumented students will typically have to pay out-of-state rates. But those out-of-state rates are extremely high. Let me give you some figures. If you're going to a public four-year college in New York State and you pay in-state tuition rates, you're going to be paying, on average, for a full-time, full-year student, $5,720 in tuition and fees, if you're in-state. If you're out-of-state, that is, and this would include undocumented immigrants, if it weren't for the fact that we had a law in the books, they'd be paying $13,000, nearly 3 times as much. That's what the law allows. And in effect, it prevents that from occurring. If you're talking about community colleges, the in-state tuition in New York State is $2,200. The out-of-state rate would have been $6,000. So the presence of legislation, thank God we've got it, that allows you to pay in-state tuition means that undocumented immigrants are not being hit with really high tuition and fees that would effectively knock them out of higher education. To give you a sense of what it is nationwide, the out-of-state tuition at a public four-year college, on average, is $18,000. The in-state tuition is $6,000. Nationwide, the out-of-state tuition, which undocumented immigrants would have to pay at two-year colleges, is $6,000. The in-state tuition is $2,200. So we're talking about huge differences. This is why the legislation allowing in-state tuition is very important. But why is it important also to be thinking about in-state aid, access to state aid, is because even when you get the in-state tuition, you're in New York State, you're going to a community college, you're still going to be paying $3,700. How are you going to pay for that? It's much better than having to pay $6,700 if you're going to a community college, but you still remain with a very large tuition bill. How are you going to pay for that? So access to in-state tuition becomes, or financial aid becomes very important. We know from a host of studies that the level of tuition and the availability of financial aid have a very strong impact on college going and college persistence, particularly by low-income students. So these policies really become very important. In a number of studies, particularly one by Stella Flores, who's at Vanderbilt University, have indicated that the passage of in-state tuition legislation, for example, in Texas, had a statistically significant, sizable impact on college-going rates among undocumented students in Texas, and there's evidence beginning to appear from other studies that that effect holds more generally than that. So the policy is important, but it cannot be just eligibility for in-state tuition. We've got to be talking about eligibility for financial aid. However, access to state financial aid is extremely important in the absence of the federal role, but then we have to think about, okay, what next? Clearly the next steps have to be passing the New York State DREAM Act. It's extremely important that in this state we make students, undocumented students, eligible for state aid, because it is important to address the remaining costs, which are still high even in New York, of attending. We need to also think about trying to put an effort into passing the federal DREAM Act. This would provide undocumented immigrants access to a certain amount of federal aid, typically not the Pell Grant. That has not been a part of the discussion, but access to loans and to work-study funding. But more importantly, the federal DREAM Act would set the stage for much broader passage of state DREAM Acts. One of the things that it would do typically, most of the provisions that the 209 bill that was introduced would have, is that it would explicitly repeal the provision in previous immigration laws that seem to prohibit states from passing in-state tuition acts. Ways have been found to indicate that that provision doesn't hold, but nonetheless, a lot of states have used that or felt that it prohibited them from taking action to pass in-state tuition eligibility. The repeal of that restriction would remove a lot of the hindrance to a lot more states joining the 12 and providing eligibility for in-state tuition. So for a variety of reasons, ideological, political, and material, passage of the federal act would be very important. But the last thing I think we need to be thinking about, and I was thinking our previous speakers have been raising very dramatically, is what happens to people after they graduate? We really have to start thinking about access to jobs. So they've gotten through college. How do we then provide access to jobs so that it's not just enough to help them get through college? We don't want to have them tremendously restricted in their opportunities. It's going to be very hard politically to start raising that issue, but it's time to start raising it. And as we know, it takes a long while to get an issue before it's ripe for action. We need to start raising the issue, have people thinking about it, begin mounting the arguments, and because this will be the next task in front of us. Let me leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Our final panelist is Dr. Kenny Neinhuser, whose dissertation is about implementation of in-state tuition legislation for undocumented students in New York. His scholarly interests include undocumented immigrants, higher education policy, state policymaking, educational access of underserved populations, and policy implementation. Dr. Neinhuser.
In 2002, with the passage of Assembly Bill 9612 and Senate Bill 7784, as was discussed earlier, New York became the fourth state to permit certain undocumented students to pay in-state tuition. Paying in-state tuition at SUNY or CUNY, which are the public institutions here in New York. Although New York passed this legislation, the mere presence of this policy will not guarantee that undocumented students experience greater access to post-secondary education. It is this area, the barriers present for the student population, that I will focus my remarks. It is important to note that barriers faced by undocumented students are not unique to undocumented students that reside in New York. Instead, these are issues that undocumented throughout the U.S. struggle with. I will highlight 4 barriers that primarily affect this population. First, as was just discussed by Dr. Doherty, high out-of-state tuition rates in those states that do not offer in-state tuition to undocumented students. Currently, as mentioned, there are 12 states that permit certain undocumented students to pay in-state tuition. And I will not share the figures that Dr. Doherty just went ahead and shared with you, but they are quite staggering and is a huge barrier towards undocumented students, in particular in those 38 states that do not permit this population to pay in-state tuition. The second barrier is related with little or no access for the student population to financial aid programs. This is the largest barrier that this population faces in their college exploration and enrollment. And I'm very purposeful in saying exploration and enrollment because this is what shapes the opportunities that students are thinking about when they're seeking college. So if they cannot pay, if they're not going to get scholarship opportunities, they are not going to be seeking to enroll in institutions that are private in nature. So it's very much shaping the way that they explore, pretty much just pushing them to go into public institutions as opposed to being able to go into private institutions. That's why I'm very purposeful in saying exploration and then enrollment is actually the decision to actually enroll at the institution, and that's also shaped for these students as well. At the federal level, this population does not qualify for any federal financial aid programs, as we just went ahead and mentioned. At the state level, currently there are only 2 states that permit its undocumented student population to partake in its state financial aid programs. New York, as we've just discussed, unfortunately is currently, and hopefully it will be one of those states that does provide it, but currently it does not provide that. Given limited financial aid opportunities, this population's access to post-secondary education is significantly deterred and shaped. A community college president I interviewed in my research work described this very issue as, quote, "They have no money to go to school. It is a tough, tough road," end quote. Third, limited availability of outreach efforts and information to assist undocumented students with their college exploration and enrollment. High school staff have very limited access to undocumented student-specific exploration and enrollment information. My research points to the reality that these institutional agents are required to seek out this information on their own, as other means currently do not exist. As a result, the student population is often underinformed about what, if any, options exist in terms of college enrollment. Similarly, some college staff are not informed of the intricacies of in-state tuition policies and the necessary information to assist this population with their college enrollment. Lastly, as was discussed earlier, the fear associated with being identified as quote-unquote illegal member of our society. The post-secondary education journey of undocumented students is very different than that of residents and citizens. The constant fear of deportation, not experienced by any other population here, affects their post-secondary education access. Questions such as, with whom should I share my immigration status? Or how do I complete a FAFSA if I do not have a social security number? These are constant reminders of how this population's immigration status shapes their post-secondary education enrollment. Given these barriers, it is up to our policy community and educational agents to work on policies and implement such policies that address undocumented students' college access. To this end, I will suggest the following recommendations. As was mentioned, maintain in-state tuition availability for undocumented students in those states that currently have that policy, and to extend those and to give this opportunity to undocumented students in those 38 states that currently do not have such a policy. On a related note, the second recommendation, and central to today's panel, is the need to provide undocumented students with access to government aid. Here in New York, that would be the tuition assistance program. One of the largest hurdles, as I just mentioned, that this population encounters related to college enrollment is financing college. Therefore, not permitting this population to partake in any state-level financial assistance programs will continue to hinder their enrolling and persisting in higher education. The third recommendation is making information related to undocumented students' college exploration and enrollment more available to educational institutional agents, undocumented students, and parents of this student population. Research I have done here in New York reveals that there are gaps at both the secondary and post-secondary education levels in the area of undocumented students' post-secondary education enrollment and access information-related information. To address this issue, institutional agents must have formal ways to receive college enrollment information that is specific to undocumented students' needs. This, for example, could be in the form of trainings and professional development opportunities. Currently in New York, these opportunities are scarce and not mandatory. In return, high school and college staff must be charged with sharing this information and bringing the issue of undocumented students' college access to the forefront by providing information related to higher education to this student population. The last recommendation associated with the fear of status disclosure, and also discussed earlier, is related to the need for the federal government to pass the Federal DREAM Act. The DREAM Act, if enacted, would provide many undocumented students with access to some federal financial aid programs, eliminate federal law that some argue bars states from providing in-state tuition to this population, and perhaps most importantly, provide a pathway to citizenship for this population. Such a policy would bring this population out of the shadows and open the avenue for this population to receive some post-secondary education benefits. In closing, it is important to note the vast majority of undocumented students, as Laura Enriquez notes, are, quote, practically indistinguishable from their documented and citizen peers, end quote. This most certainly includes the dreams and aspirations to attend post-secondary education. However, this population is in a precarious position. To rely on the policy community to enact inclusive post-secondary education policies, and must often depend on secondary and post-secondary education institutional agents to have the necessary information and offer the additional assistance this population needs to understand the specific circumstances that their college exploration and matriculation in college has to do. It is imperative that both policy and education communities understand the student population's needs and work to address them in a way that will increase access for undocumented students. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. I'm delighted to be here listening the whole framework of what is all about the New York Dream Act. I've been following very closely what is happening with the federal Dream Act, and I've been in touch with Assembly Member Linares and Senator Bill Perkins, and we're trying to do as much as we can as representing a foreign government in order to support these initiatives, because for us it is crucial that the Mexican community has access to not only access to education but to have also financial help, and that we are doing also as much as we can in order to give some support to the students of Mexican origin. But having said that, I would like to ask the two congressmen, what are the real possibilities as we speak of having this Dream Act being passed or being approved by the governor? We are following also what is happening at the national level, and now there is, again, this political game between the two parties, who is going to be presenting what, and what is the reach of the outreach of each one of the initiatives that are there. We know that it is a political situation because of the election is being faced, but there is more real possibilities, we read it that way, of having something here in the state of New York, and we are very much encouraged for that. We sent also a letter to Governor Cuomo, the group of Latin American countries associated in Association of Consul Generals. So in order for him to learn that we are very concerned and we can do as much as we need to do. Thank you. But if there is something else that we need to do, please let us know on one hand. On the other hand, how do you see these possibilities now? The expectations for our people are great, are huge, and they keep dreaming and dreaming and dreaming. And what is already happening in New York is so important because there is already the possibility of enrolling into a college, a public school, paying in state tuition. But the next step is so crucial for all the reasons that have been shown here. So I'm glad to hear, and thank you, Regina, for inviting me to be here in this forum again, this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the leadership of the Council of Latin American General Councils for sending a letter to the governor urging him to be supportive of this piece of legislation. I believe, you know, and I just landed in the state legislature last year. In my first year, I learned that you set expectations high, and if somehow people identify themselves with those expectations, perhaps you could move the leadership to act. And that was with the livery legislation that I was sort of the driving force. I used to be a livery driver. That's how I paid my way through college. But I had the opportunity to to push for that legislation with the opposition of the yellow industry. And, you know, and it was forceful, powerful, but somehow enough came around to pass the legislation and have the governor sign it into law. So we legalized the livery industry as an immigrant industry. I believe, I mean, I didn't think that this would happen, but it did, because somehow the expectation reached a level where not even this powerful economic interest in the city of New York that held it for 42 years, this time they could not hold it. So if the expectation for this piece of legislation reaches a level that goes beyond the minority legislators that we have, whether they are Black, Latinos, Asian, and the progressive representatives that we have, but also some Republicans and some Democrats that may be on the fence because, you know, they have constituency that may get him into trouble whenever they have election. This is a year of election. All the senators and all of the assembly members have to face the constituency. And the district that has 15% or more Latinos or 20, 30% immigrants, and they identify with this and they say, I'm going to listen to those who want to be elected or for me to come out, or the people that I know, to say, what is your position in terms of the New York Dream Act, giving access to education? Something in the mind of all the elected officials, but when it comes to the speaker, he will have to listen to a core group of assembly members or a core group of senators, and the governor will have to say, I have an opportunity to act as I have so far successfully. Do I have to act with this? I think it depends on how many New Yorkers from angles that he perhaps does not expect to get the calls, the people least expected to reach out to him and say, how about this piece of legislation that we think is critical and central? So it's a management of expectation and also consequences, whether you do or you don't do. And I think that that is the extent in the next 2 months. We have April, and we have May, and 2 weeks in June. That's the window that we have. And this is the year to pass it. And New Yorkers must know across different ethnicities and region that this is the time to make it happen. Because otherwise, I don't know what the future holds, but we could make it happen. I feel very confident that we're going to get the leadership to say New Yorkers really want this, and we do. We do. So I say the possibilities are high, but it's on us as New Yorkers.
It's a very exciting year, not only in the state level, but also in the national level, due to the presidential elections. And apparently everybody's just trying to get a piece of the cake. We could say that the DREAM Act is now bipartisan. The Senator Marco Rubio from Florida introduced a similar version of the DREAM Act. Of course, maybe not all for the right reasons, but that's a political game they're playing. Nevertheless, I believe that a social change causes a political change, not the other way around. So if we want to see changes, we have to start with ourselves. For those undocumented students here at Columbia University, because there are students here who are undocumented, come out of the shadows, share your stories, tell your friends, tell your faculty members your stories. For those faculty members here, let your students speak about their stories. That way we could stop all the stereotypes or the prejudice that are being said about us. So once again, I believe a social change causes a political change. And if we want some changes, we have to start with ourselves. That's all.
I think it's a very powerful gesture that will have an impact. If you want to add to that, I might have a few ideas. I don't know how practical they are, and I also know in the position that you're in, you're not as free as, let's say, me to say or whatever. So I'm sensitive to that. But the Dreamers are going to arrive in New York, in Albany. And it would be great if you and your colleagues were there to greet them. I think it would seal the connection, and it would give the press an opportunity to have a great shot that will send a great message. In fact, you can deliver to them copies of the letter. I think theater, to some extent, if I can put it in that way, is very, very important as a way of making sure that this stays in the public's eye. this has to not be a movement that is in the closet, that is not a part of the common concern that is picked up by the media. So I think if you're able to, the gestures of that type would be valuable in helping to communicate. Because we live in the media, those of us who are elected, you know, and even our governor will have to respond. And it's very, very important that he be allowed to be a part of the discussion, that he be brought into the discussion so that he can understand that it's nothing for him to be politically afraid of. And that from a budgetary point of view, it's nothing to be, in fact, quite the opposite. It's an opportunity for him to be a hero and to make New York a leader nationally. So I think gestures of the type that you and your colleagues make are very, very influential, and especially on the dreamers to know that you are with them in that way, that you're a part of that movement. So anything that you can do in that vein, I think is useful. If you want have some meetings and discuss strategies, my office, and I'm sure the Assemblyman's office, is very, very available because you will bring greater profile to this movement. It's a very, very important movement. I also want to, I forgot to acknowledge United States Senator Gillibrand for her support of this legislation, and I think that's very, very important. And of course, the mayor of the city of New York has spoken quite eloquently in support of this legislation. So there is high-profile political, leadership that is becoming coming on board, and I think that the consul generals that you're a part of and others making gestures of that type really give credibility to the movement. Sometimes when young people take leadership, they're dismissed as just being foolish, or they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. That was the big concern about a lot of the movements of the anti-war movements, the civil rights movement. All the movements that have made significant changes in our country have been led by foolish young people who don't know what it really takes to do what has to be done. So, but when they get supported by the adult leadership, so to speak, then it really emboldens them, and it brings attention in a way that adds a great deal of credibility to what they're doing, that they're not just being simply quixotic, that they know what they're doing and that there's value for everybody in it. Thank you. We would treasure the opportunity to have you working with us on these types of policies. You bring a lot of research, enthusiasm, idealism, perspective that is valuable for what we do. So that's one very, very important way that we try to take the opportunity to include, and we don't, it's not just going to be sort of incidental work. You will author some of the work that we do because we find it very valuable too. So, Cordell, please stand up in case they didn't see you for the third time, and make sure that you get a chance to say hello to her. Thank you.
I think in this particular area, more than any other, because we're talking about 12 to 15 million undocumented. We know that about 500,000 are estimated in New York City, but in the state it's probably more like 1 million. These are the families that live in the shadow, in constant fear, day and night, 24/7. And they are often not counted in the census that just took place. or they are in the margins in so many respects. And yet, they are in the labor force and labor demands. The people who are doing most of the job that the majority of those of us who have been around longer don't want to do even if they paid us. And there's no restaurant that you walk into New York City that does not connect to the people who either clean or in the kitchen or serving or connected to that. But you go to the service industry or you go to any industry, private sector primarily, where these families are not connected to. In fact, there is no neighborhood that can survive and cope without the services that these families provide. And yet, they are on the shadow. They are not counted, except if you work, you pay taxes to an ID number, because you pay taxes also. And perhaps, this is one area, if there was any, where research is so critical and important to help shape the offering that this country provides, or any neighborhood, or any city, municipality, or state, or the country as a whole. And I think if we believe that in investing on the new generation of leadership that the country desperately is in need of, you represent here that emerging leadership that not only needs to make sure that you do the appropriate research and look deep into the root causes or the challenges faced by the most vulnerable, but not because they don't have the spirit and the determination, but because the circumstances that they have to face are huge and limiting. But yet, they are, I say, you know what the solution for me, and I was a teacher when I graduated from college a long time ago. You know what the New York Dream Act is for me? The torch that lights up this country and this state, which is held by the aspiration of young people that in spite of not having support and being on the shadow, they have somehow managed to swim uphill to show all the other young people who have somehow even dropped out of high school, have lost the spirit of looking to make something, at least getting an education. And yet, these young people hold the torch to really show the masses of generations, particularly people of color, young people of color, that have lost what they have. Their fight is to be able to get an education. The fight of all of us in this system, how do we convince young people to get back to school? Well, the answer is the spirit that these young people bring, that are daring to do everything and risk everything to get what this country is supposed to offer all of us. So I say to you, those of us who are fortunate to be able to not to take for granted what they don't have, we have a responsibility. And if you graduate from an institution of higher ed, or if you're in the process of that, you have a big, big responsibility on the shoulder. All of us do, no matter what profession you take. And that is to look to help lift those around us and to serve the community. And I think that that's really the calling that we're making here, but they're making, we're helping them make it. Because if they are making it in spite of all that, then there is hope.
So diversity is at the base of this nation's strength and success. The DREAM Act is central to the American story, to its past, present, and the promise of a future. As our representatives and presenters have shown today, a significant portion of this promise is education. The themes and statistics presented today show numbers of great concern for the future of immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants. It is clear that things have to change, and the New York DREAM Act is one step towards that change. An important message to take from today's presentation is that one person does make a difference. Please get informed. Write to your governor. Talk to others. Again, you can make a difference. I would like to thank Senator Bill Perkins and Assemblyman Guillermo Linares for taking time from their very busy schedules to be here with us. I would also like to thank the presenters who have shared their research, experience, and stories today. And finally, I would like to thank two young people that are teacher college students, Gloria Calderon and Nancy Mata, whose passion has been key in making this event happen. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming here today. And please join us for a reception right after the event on Zankel 128. Thank you so much for coming.